Well, good morning to each of you. We are so happy that you're here with us, and we want to welcome you to this presentation. I'm here with Stephen Grabiner, who is the president of Outpost Centers International, and we're delighted that each of you have joined us here as well with the ASI for this ASI virtual convention. We are so happy that even though we can't meet in person, that we're able to meet over the internet, and we're happy as well that we can hear wonderful presenters that can share with us some very important messages and seminars. And today we're going to be, Stephen is going to be sharing with us the extraordinary leadership that is needed. And I'm looking forward to what he's going to share with us. We're so glad you're here, Stephen. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
It's all yours. And I just wanted to tell those that are watching us that if you want to chat with us, feel free. Right where you can watch this seminar, you'll see over on the sidebar, there's a chat area, and some people have already sent some messages. So feel free to chat with us, ask your questions, and we'll be happy to take those at the end of the presentation. Thank you so much, Stephen, for being with us. We look forward to hearing from you.
Great. Well, thank you, Wayne. Let's begin together with a word of prayer, asking for God's presence to give us wisdom and guidance. Father in heaven, thank you for this opportunity to meet, although not together personally, to meet virtually. We do pray that your Spirit would bless both the communications and the technology, that everything would go well, that each one of us might be encouraged and motivated to improve in our leadership. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. So again, our title today is Extraordinary Leadership Needed. And it's part of the OCI track with the three angels' messages. And we do live in extraordinary times, and unquestionably, extraordinary leadership is necessary for today. And we think we look at the world, we look at the political situation here in the United States, in other parts of the world, we can really see not only in the church, but just globally, this great lack and this great need for leaders of character, leaders of vision, leaders that are able to transcend the various difficulties that are confronting each one of us. And that's really going to be what we're going to be looking at today. I've got a number of aims that I want to try to reach through in our time together. First of all, I want to spend some time discussing the importance of leadership and how leadership impacts all lines of our organizations. And then we're going to spend a bit of time ferreting out what those qualities are that make for extraordinary leaders, and try to really clarify what are some key aspects. And what I'm going to be sharing, a lot of it's very research-based, and so there'll be some good information for you, good data for you. And then we're going to end on some tips for your own personal leadership development. And then we'll take some questions and answers if there are any. And let me just say, as part of OCI, strengthening leaders around the world is part of what we do. I'm also a certified leadership coach. And spending time with leaders over the years has really taught me the importance of focusing on leadership development. And we see this, again, as I've mentioned, across all spheres of the church, both in our local congregations, in our conferences, unions, everywhere there's a need for leaders to grow in their skill set. And so let's kind of go through. I have a couple of quotations I want to start with. This one's from volume 2 of the Testimonies, page 645. Ellen White writes here that the people, speaking in a church setting, will seldom rise higher than their minister. A world-loving spirit in him has a tremendous influence upon others. So here's a very important principle, that the character of the leader, sets a certain bar, sets a certain tone, and it's very rare for people to rise higher than the tone or the bar that's set by the leader. So again, that really is an impactful thought for each one of us. Continuing, she writes that the people make his deficiencies an excuse to cover their own world-loving spirit. So she's talking very particularly here about the minister who tends toward the world, but we can extrapolate from that, this principle, move out from that and thinking that the strengths of a leader oftentimes impacts the organization, so that becomes the ceiling of where team members grow to. So this is a really important thought for those people that are in leadership. What am I doing individually to grow, and how am I promoting growth among those that are part of my team? And as I've already mentioned, leadership impacts all aspects of an organization, and we can't really overstress this. Now, it's maybe a small caveat here. I don't want to imply that leadership only exists at the top of an organization. If we're kind of using that hierarchical model, we might say refer to a president of an organization, or a pastor in a church, or a conference president, or a union administrator. It'd be wrong for us to think, and I'm not trying to imply, that leadership only resides in those key positions. Leadership can be very diffuse in an organization. There are plenty of individuals who exercise their influence and their leadership in a secondary or tertiary role in an organization. So leadership can be really widespread. However, our focus today really are on the main leaders of the organization and how they impact the strength and the growth of their organizations. So another quotation, this is from volume 7 of the Testimonies, page 117. And I remember reading this while helping operate 3 vegetarian restaurants in New York City quite a number of years ago. And there were 2 in the Wall Street area and then 1 in Midtown. And I was the manager of one of those restaurants. And when I read this quote, it really spoke to me, because our restaurants, again, restaurants are a tremendous avenue for us to come in contact with people and to impact people, be very missional with people, impact them for the gospel. And yet they also have this entrepreneurial aspect, way of creating jobs. So, but here's a really important point. The managers of our restaurants are to work for the salvation of the employees. Now notice that. Managers working for the salvation of the employees. They, the managers, must not overwork, because by so doing, they will place themselves where they have neither strength nor inclination to help the workers spiritually. They are to devote their best powers to instructing their employees in spiritual lines, explaining the scriptures to them and praying with them and for them. And then the quotation goes on. I'm not going to continue quoting the rest of the passage, but the quotation goes on and describes how then the employees will be in such a situation where they will be in tune with the Holy Spirit and will sense the promptings of the Spirit to speak to the various customers. But a couple of principles I want to draw out from this quotation. Again, we notice the primary thought here, the work of the manager is to work for the salvation of the employees, really key thought there. But then this other idea that the managers, let's translate this back to leadership, the leaders must not overwork, because by so doing, they place themselves where they don't have the strength or inclination to help their team members grow spiritually. So let me kind of pull that principle out of this quotation, that if we're in a leadership position, it's often very easy for us as leaders to think, well, I just need to keep pushing through, and it's okay if I overwork or I don't get enough rest or things of that nature. But really, if I'm not practicing, concern for myself, as a phrase that's often used today, that self-compassion, it's going to be very difficult for me to have the energy, the spiritual focus to give my attention to my team as well. So this is another important thread that we can pull out and think through, that our leaders need to be aware of our own weaknesses, of our own limitations, so that we could better serve others. So I have a poll question, and I think Wayne's going to put the poll up. Again, I'm at a slight disadvantage the way we're doing this. I can't really see who's here or not. But in faith, my question here on this poll question is, are you currently in a leadership role? And I'll wait for Wayne.
Let me just explain briefly to those that are watching. that yes, you can definitely answer these poll questions. In fact, it's up on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side rather, right next to the chat button, you'll see that there's also a poll button. So if you click on that, then I will set the poll to live here momentarily, and then we can follow along with Stephen as he shares, and we can interact by giving our answers to those poll questions. Back over to you.
Okay. So yeah, so Wayne, if you're able to put that up live, and then we can delve into this. It would just be helpful to know like how many people are currently in a leadership role in your particular organizations. And so Wayne, maybe you can give me a heads up as to how that's unfolding with becoming live and getting some responses from there.
Good. So we will have the responses as soon as I close the poll. So I think I'll give them maybe 30 seconds or so, and we'll close it, and then I'll let you know the response.
All right. And I appreciate everybody that's participating, your patience, cooperation with us as we kind of navigate this new venture. And I've got a follow-up question coming. Just as a heads up, there's two questions here. One, are you currently in a leadership role? And then the second one, well, how long have you been in that? That just kind of give us a little bit of a feel for our audience today.
So the results of the poll was that 5 people said yes, they are in leadership roles, and 1 person is not at this time.
Okay, so then let's just go to this next one. We can just put that up. And so then this next question, of course, is how long have you been in that position? Just try to get a feel for who we're together with today. So you're able to get that live, Wayne?
Yes, so it's live now, and we can just leave it up for a couple of minutes and then close it out.
All right. And so while you're filling that out, and then when you close it out, just feel free to interrupt me, Wayne. And I'm just going to continue with the presentation as individuals are working with the poll. Would that work okay?
Perfect.
Okay, so let me share here an financial impact on the organization. What I want to do in the next few slides is share some research with you with a research organization by the name of Zenger Folkman. And they've interviewed, in some cases, hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of leaders. And they've tried to ascertain the impact that leadership has on the organization. And that's what I'm going to be sharing with you through the next couple of slides. And so on the bottom of the slide, you see the numbers 10%, 80%, 90%. So let me explain those numbers first. The 10% would be if you were to be scored, perhaps do a 360 evaluation or a self-assessment of your own personal leadership skills. If you were to rank rather at the bottom 10%, that's indicated by the 10% on the slide. If you were, let's say, in the 80th percentile of leaders, so that you ranking, in that 80th percentile, there's only 20% above you. That's your marker. If you're in that top 10% or you're at the 90th percentile, that's the other ranking. So just so you understand that percentages on the bottom. So what are the charts representing? On the left-hand side of the slide, you can see numbers. Those represent dollars. So those leaders that rank in the 10% percentage, 10% quartile, 10% of leadership skills, as they're measured compared to others, if their ranking is at 10%, generally speaking, those leaders have a really negative impact on the organization. And you can see that they bring about a loss here of about $1.25 million. Those leaders that rank at the 80th percentile, so they're very good leaders, you can see they almost generate around $2.5 million in their organizations. But notice if you simply go up 10%, if you hit that 90th percentile, you're not quite doubling, but you're reaching that $5 million mark there. So there's a large impact in the organization, clearly from being at the 10th percentile to the 80th percentile. But then there's also a larger impact when you're going from the 80th to the 90th percentile. And that's really one of the main points I want to bring out in this presentation, is wherever you are in your leadership development and in your leadership growth, if you're at 10% or 15, 50, maybe you're a 90% leader or 95% leader, wherever you are, if you will begin to move upward, your impact in the organization is really going to grow. So that's financially. Well, we're working with a church situation, ASI ministries, supporting ministries, church leadership. Maybe the financial metric really isn't that strong for us. But how do we impact our employees? How do we impact the team that works for us? That's a really relevant question for us. And so if you're at the bottom 30 percentile, again, 30, 60, 90 represents the percentile of where leaders are. And so if you're in the bottom 30%, then you're going to have a very high turnover. So, you might be turning over almost 20 of your employees. That's a very high turnover rate. If you're at the 60th percentile, your turnover rate drops down. And if you're at the 90th percentile, your turnover rate drops down less than half from the 30th percentile. And we all know that impact on employees is tremendous. So this can transcend into many different fields for us. We think about our churches, think about a pastor trying to get people engaged in the church. What's the leadership skill of the pastor, and how is it impacting the congregation? Are people staying in the church, or moving out of the church? What about in our denominational offices or in our supporting ministry work? How are we impacting the team that people are working with us? Is there a solidity in the team, or are people turning over rapidly? This is really directly related, not entirely, but very largely directly related to the style or the skill of the leadership. And then the impact on customer satisfaction. Sorry, Wayne, were you going to interrupt me?
No problem. If you'd like to have the results, I can give them to you
Yes,
for the
thanks.
poll. So
Yes.
We have the majority of people that have actually been in leadership for less than 5 years.
Okay.
And then we have a smaller number that have been in for 5 to 10 years, and just one person that's been in for 25 plus years. So that's the results.
Okay, well, whoever you are, maybe you should be doing the presentation. But again, welcome, and I'm really happy that there's a group of leaders here that are, relatively young in their leadership experience. That's really encouraging, because it's a personal aim and desire of mine, is to help emerging leaders learn some of the things that it's taken a lot of other leaders much longer to overcome. So really welcome. Thanks for that, Wayne. So impact, this is like on customer satisfaction. So how well are we doing in communicating with others? Again, this is a business model, but let's translate it into either to our supporting ministries or into our church, or if business leaders that are attending this webinar as well. We could think about this, that if you are in the 20th percentile, the bottom 20 percentile, you have a very low customer satisfaction rating. And you can see how it just moves up, and this is directly correlated to the ability of the leader to improve their leadership style. So if you have a leader that's in the 80th percentile, and this is judged by other people doing perhaps a 360 assessment in addition to their own self-assessments, then they have a very high impact on customer satisfaction. So we really cannot overestimate or overstress the importance of leadership in these different domains, both financially. Maybe in a church, we could think about that in terms of relation to giving, tithes and offerings. Then employee turnover, we could think about that as to how long people are staying in your ministry, or customer satisfaction. How are you doing ministering to others? How well are people being blessed by your organization? So the great danger for leaders here is that we often think that good is good enough. Now, I realize that there is an expression, and there's a lot of truth to this expression, that says the best is the enemy of the good. And what that expression means is sometimes, we just fiddle with everything until it's absolutely perfect, and then we never really come out with it. J.N. Andrews, who was a tremendous scholar and historian, had a bit of that perfectionistic side. And his book on the history of the Sabbath, Ellen White had it just urged him, would just publish the book already, because he was always tinkering. So the best is the enemy of the good. And that's true in lots of circumstances. Publishing a book, there's always typos in a book. But when we come to leadership, there's a great danger in thinking that good is good enough. If I'm above average leader, I'm at 60%, 70%, then I begin to think, okay, well, I'm doing pretty well. And one of the great dangers for leaders, I have in another leadership presentation we do, is one of the traps of leaders, and that is plateauing, getting to a place where we've reached a level in our ministry, perhaps, 25 years in ministry, we're in leadership, and we think we know things, and then we just become, comfortable, and we plateau. And that's a great danger for our organizations. We should be continually growing, continually advancing. So, just another poll here, and this is kind of a very subjective poll, and Wayne, maybe you could get the poll up, and as I'll explain it as you're doing that. And again, this is just a, off the cuff, nobody knows who you are and how you're answering. What percentile do you think others would rate your leadership skill at? So, and I've given you some markers there that you could choose, and, just choose one, and then we'll give Wayne a chance to get that poll live and to give you time to do some of the answers. And I'm going to continue with the conversation. And then Wayne, you just interrupt me when you have kind of a rough feel for that. That be okay, Wayne?
Sure, no problem.
Okay, so what would you hear? Just, where would you rate yourself at? Or how do you think others people would rate you at? So for organizations, we talk a lot of strategic planning in teams and in organizations and in ministries, but oftentimes one of the key areas in strategic planning that we overlook is leadership development. And leadership really is a very important strategic imperative. What are we doing to develop new leaders? What kind of resources are we putting through there? Are we providing leadership coaching? Are we helping them get assessments? What are we doing for our pastors? What are we doing in our administrations? How do we help leaders develop? Is it part of our longer term strategic planning? Oftentimes, our strategic development, our strategic thinking, is very outward focused, and we do not take the time to think through how do we develop leaders internally, and that's a real concern. So this is from Signs of the Times, March 2nd, 1882. Ellen White writes this, that God designed that man should be constantly improving, and obviously she's speaking generically here, that humanity should be constantly improving, daily reaching a higher point in the scale of excellence. So let's be very clear here, just so that we don't fall into any trap of perfectionism. We're always moving in that direction. We're always striving that direction. But daily, we should be thinking, what kind of levels can I improve with? How can my leadership skill, how can my personal walk with God improve? How do I become a greater influence for good in the role that God's called me to?
So we have the results of the polls, if you'd like.
Great. Yeah, sure. Thank you.
People were a little bit more hesitant to answer these questions, but we had some that were in the 50% and some that were in the 75%. A little bit less participation, perhaps. We feel a little bit shy to know how to kind of evaluate ourselves.
Yeah. And the question was, how would others evaluate you? And that's hard as well to say. But thank you for that. And yeah, so just a really interesting thought there. One of the cognitive tricks that our mind plays with us is always the overconfidence bias, where we tend to rate ourselves better. Some of us have a negative aspect of that. We always underrate ourselves. But thank you for participating in that. So, what are some reasons that hinder our growth? What are some reasons that keep us, whoever said they were at the 75 percentile, maybe feeling like, oh, I'm pretty good, I'm comfortable here. But, what keeps us from moving forward, from really intentionally developing as leaders and becoming, as our title of the talk today says, extraordinary leaders? Well, one thing is that we blame poor performers. We we tend to think that our lack of skill set is the result of somebody else's issue. So we have this tendency where we blame other people, we blame the poor performers. Also, training tends to focus on poor performers. And so there's this kind of a stigma there where, some kind of leadership development almost implies, and oftentimes it does imply, or directly states that when you're getting training, it's because there's a lack in you, and therefore you're in this poor performance, and that creates some kind of a stigma. So that's also a negative. Another reason that we hesitate, or we tend not to embrace leadership development and moving to become an extraordinary leader, is because we compare to the average. And so if I'm average, okay, well, I'm average. Or if I'm slightly above average, that's really good enough. Another area, of course, is that we just tend to fail to understand how large of an impact, how an oversized impact leaders have on organizations. And then this last trick, and that is we really just think that great leaders are very rare. And they are generally rare. We don't see a lot of them in our society, particularly in our political arena today. But that may simply be a result of individuals not moving forward in their leadership skill. So we shouldn't let this rarity of great leaders or being extraordinary leaders impact us personally. On the contrary, we should be thinking, well, how can I grow in my leadership skill? How can I improve? So let's think a little bit now, kind of shifting from focusing on the importance of leadership, thinking about those characteristics that embody strong leaders or move people into the realm of becoming extraordinary leaders. And so this illustration, again, comes from that organization I mentioned earlier, Zinger Folkman, and they use this illustration. I think it's really helpful, of a tent. So this picture may not really look like a tent to you, but that's what it's supposed to illustrate. And the 4 blue circles are tent poles, and the yellow dimension is the canopy of the tent. So let's think about it that way. And so the canopy, the main part of the tent, is character. Now, this is the key central issue with leaders, and this comes across in all leadership studies, that character is essential, unhesitantly important, unequivocally important in, a church setting, but even in the business world and wherever we look, character is coming out as a key quality of an essential necessity for being an extraordinary leader. And then we have these 4 main spheres. And these spheres can be broken down into smaller groupings as well. Results, skill set, change, and capability. And if you think about these, if you can mentally do this, if you think about these 4 spheres as a pole holding up the larger canopy, if the poles are smaller, closer to the ground, or if the tent canopy itself, then it shrinks, then you cover a very small surface area. So that would represent a leader who is in the lower percentile. But if those poles are large and the tent covering is broad, then you're covering a larger surface area and you're having a larger dimension. So let's talk about these just briefly as well. So character, again, is the main focal point. It's the tent covering. It's the essential part of being a leader, and within character is keeping your commitments, being a role model, doing what you say you're going to do, be a person that people would look up to, as Paul said to Timothy, follow me as I have also followed Christ. Character really essential. And then these other 4 areas are, the capability, personal capabilities. Those are the skill sets that a leader needs for his or her task. And so depending on what the task is, those capabilities might change. But personal capabilities are that cluster of skill sets, whether they're accounting or visionary aspects, or different things would apply to different organizations. But personal capabilities, in a scientific realm, there would be a certain skill set, a capability there. So personal capabilities are what are those skill sets that are essential for your particular task. Then the next aspect is the focus on results. How results driven is the leader? This is a really important viewpoint, and we'll talk about this in the next one momentarily. The next one is interpersonal skills. How well do I motivate and embrace my team? How successful am I in helping my team members to grow? That would be the interpersonal skill set. What's my communication level like? Am I approachable? Am I distant? Those would be those interpersonal skills. And then there's embracing organizational change. Again, how good am I at bringing change into the organization? So, if we think about all of these, these comprise key areas that can be measured, can be, people can give their feedback to the leader on, and they're very essential for developing an extraordinary leader. And as we continue in our conversation, we're going to note that if you begin to combine some of these, so let's say, for example, that you're not really good at personal capability in a certain area, maybe you don't have the technical expertise, but you're very good on focusing on results and interpersonal skills and organizational change, that will raise your entire leadership profile. So there's this kind of a synergistic effect. Now, in each one of our lives, there are times where we have our own individual passions. Those are the things that we're excited about. And then we have our individual skill sets, the competencies that we become adept at fulfilling. And then there's always the organization that we're working for. Oftentimes, those spheres don't match up. So at times they can be very distinctly different, very different. We can be in an organization, we can be working in an organization where our skill set is not really applicable and our passion is certainly not there. If you're in that situation, I really encourage you to begin praying for a change. Oftentimes our passion and our competencies overlap, but we really become effective in the center here where our skill set, our competencies, and the organizational needs and our passions intersect. And when we're in an organization like that, if we're in a leadership role like that, then we can have the largest impact. So when we think about leadership development, this is a question leaders need to be asking themselves. Do my skill sets and does my passion intersect with the organizational aims? And if they don't, how can I either change those organizational aims if I'm in that position and the organization is in that period of its growth, or how can I realign myself into a different organization? So again, on growth, this is from the book Education. Ellen White says, many do not become what they might because they do not put forth the power that is in them. They do not, as they might, lay hold of divine strength. Many are diverted from the line in which they might reach the truest success. So she's talking here, and if you read the whole passage in the book Education, she's describing how some individuals who are suited for perhaps a career in business feel like they want to go into the ministry and they don't do a good job of being in ministry. And other individuals who are suited for being ministers don't feel the calling, and so they do something else and they don't fulfill their potential. So that's the greater context of what she's saying here. But again, the lesson here is many do not become what they might because we don't put forth the energy to develop what's inside of us. We become diverted. We really don't find that sweet spot where our skill set, our passion, and our organizational needs intersect with one another. Continuing again, she says, there are others again who might have filled a responsible calling, but who for want or lack of energy, application, or perseverance content themselves with an easier place. So again, there are capabilities. There is this level of, what could I say, skill sets that might, or competencies that might better suit us for a particular task, but there are plenty of people who do not put forth the effort and don't grow in their skill set to take a responsible calling. Why? Simply because of lack of energy, application, perseverance. and think that they're going to be an easier place. So if we think about leaders and becoming an extraordinary leader, let's spend a little bit of time talking about how we interact with teams, And there's two ways that we can motivate teams. We can drive our team members, kind of push them, or we can encourage our team members or pull them along. And so the question is, what really has the greatest impact? Inspiring people and motivating them, or driving for results. Now, earlier, I brought out that one of those pillars of the tent is driving for results, and the other pillar of the tent is interpersonal relationship. So you might be thinking, well, really, we need both of these, and that's entirely true. We do need both of these. And when we combine these skills, when we combine the focus on results, accountability and focusing on results with the interpersonal skills, it has an exponential impact on how the leader is perceived in fulfilling their task. So, if you want to grow in your leadership skill set, have a greater impact as a leader, think of these two spheres particularly. How do I do in moving people toward results, and how do I do in inspiring people and in motivating? Combined, they have a large impact. So here's some research that showed that a number of leaders, 76%, rated high on the push level, but oftentimes they indicate that they have a preference for pulling. So this is kind of an interesting dynamic. They want to be leaders that motivate and pull, but they're perceived as being leaders that push and drive. So, a lot of this is connected with 360-degree feedback on over 14,000 leaders. So let me just briefly go through some points here that can help us improve the skill set of motivating people. That's what I'm talking about here, the pulling part, the motivating part of leadership. And here you could, on the slide, I have these 5 key things. There's actually 10 of them. I have another slide as well. First of all, develop an emotional connection with your leadership team. How well do you connect with people? Ellen White describes a minister can take someone's hand and shake their hand. And by the way you're shaking someone's hand, a person knows if you're interested in them or not. But think through, how do I develop this emotional connection with my staff, my organization, my team members? How do I help members create goals that move them forward, stretch goals? This is an important aspect of motivation. Now, if I'm only focusing on goals, I can come across as driving people, as pushing them toward results. So that's an important aspect, but it needs to be balanced by these others. Another thing here is clarity on vision. Is the vision of the team, the organization, is it very clear? Do we know where we're going? Are we communicating well? Are our communications clear and transparent to people? And are we working on developing others? That's a very important skill set for extraordinary leaders. Do they develop other people as well? Among the team, are we collaborating well? Are we thinking through how we can do new ideas? Another important aspect of extraordinary leaders. Do we take initiative? Are we thinking through how we can change the organization? And this very key point, am I being a role model? Is my life consistent with what I'm trying to communicate with others? So a very important part of being an extraordinary leader is the foundation of trust. And again, many different studies have brought this out. This is by Covey and Conant, one of their books. It says that trust is the one thing that changes everything. Without it, every part of your organization can fall literally into disrepair. So trust is really an essential aspect. And it's the work of the leader to help develop trust, to bring trust into fruition. And a leader does that in numerous ways. A leader does that by communicating straightforwardly, by doing what they say they're going to do, by not having favorites, by trying to find out what team members need. So here are some questions that can help you develop trust in your organization. As a leader, have you ever asked your team members, what do you need to do the work? What can I provide for you? Do you have what you need to accomplish your work? And then to ask a different question, what gets in the way of your doing your work? So there may be things in the work environment, there may be personal issues, there may be interpersonal issues, what gets in your way, what hinders you from doing your work? And then this last question is very important, to ask individuals on your team, what does support look like to you? And that's a really key point, because each one of us, support looks different to each one of us. So for example, when I'm ill, when I'm not feeling well, I like to be left alone. My lovely wife likes to be cared for. So we want to be supported in two very different ways. Without asking our team, what does support look like to you? We are in danger of making mistakes, of giving support that does not come across as if it really is support. So another poll question, and Wayne, maybe you could put this poll question up. Is trust high on your team, the people that you're working with? Would you say that trust is high on your team? So when you get that poll live, just let me know when it's live.
It's live. I think it'll just take a moment because it's just a yes or no question. So it's live and we can close it here momentarily.
Okay. So is trust high on your team? And you can just let me know when you have the answers for that. And I'm going to move into the next slide here that talks about some trust builders, okay? And just feel free to interrupt me. So
I may have closed it actually too quickly because it looks like we didn't get results that time.
Okay.
I don't know if I can open it again or not. I may have closed it a little too quickly.
Okay. Let's continue here talking about trust, building trust, and thinking through here, what are some of the steps that will build trust? Okay, so I'm getting a message to start my video.
Yeah, I think we lost it momentarily, but if you could just turn it back on, we'll be all set. We're good.
So I clicked yes, are we together?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, good. So let's talk about things that build trust. One thing that builds trust in an organization, and this is an essential aspect for being an extraordinary leader, is to have difficult conversations. And difficult conversations, tough conversations, those conversations are those kind of conversations that either might be emotional or they might be confrontational. They're the conversations that you're trying to avoid. Having these tough conversations, not being afraid to engage with those conversations is important. Demonstrating both empathy and compassion are important aspects of building trust. Having both of those skill sets there, both being empathetic and compassionate, are important for building trust. People realize that you're one with them. This next thing is really important, avoiding both shame and blame. So in every organization, people make mistakes. And those of us that have been in leadership for a long time, we have certainly had our share of mistakes. The question is, how did people respond when you've made a mistake? Sometimes we get shamed when we've made a mistake. We begin to feel, and I think each one of us know what shame feels like. You get that hot, warm rush of a feeling. Sometimes your face gets flushed, sometimes not, but it's that very internal, very physiological effect of being shamed and blamed. Sometimes it makes us feel small. We need to avoid both shaming and blaming in our work to really build trust. People make a mistake. They should have the freedom to say, look, I made this mistake. And they should be comfortable saying that because they know there's not going to be the repercussions on them, or they're not going to be shamed for them. There might be repercussions in terms of, okay, well, how do we fix this? But there's not going to be the shaming and blaming. In fact, I encourage teams to develop a situation where we have a situation that is safe to fail, where people have a certain limit, and if they fail, they have a new idea and they fail within a certain framework, it's not going to destroy the organization. That would be to allow people to make mistakes, really have this culture where mistakes are, no one's afraid to say I made a mistake because the culture encourages this making mistake. And then this idea building trust also is being vulnerable. And by being vulnerable, I don't really mean sharing everything with everyone, but I mean being willing to stay with people in difficult conversations. That's what I mean by being vulnerable. Stay in those circumstances where you don't know how it's going to turn out, but you're just going to stay there because you're committed to the person, you're committed to the team, you're committed to the vision of your organization. So I'm going to skip this poll there. Let's just move on, just in the interest of time. This is a quotation from Brene Brown on building trust. Vulnerability is having the courage to keep going, even if you don't know the outcome. And in our current environment with COVID-19 and the social civil unrest in the United States, there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty going on. And unfortunately, uncertainty at times can be paralyzing for leaders. When we're vulnerable, that means, hey, I don't really know what's going to happen, but I still have the courage to continue moving forward. Sometimes people want everything to be very clear. Like some of us have a very difficult time with lack of clarity or lack of certainty or living in uncertainty. Leaders need to be able to come to the point where they live in that realm of uncertainty and they're willing to be vulnerable. They're willing to say, I really don't know how this is going to turn out, but we're going to continue to move forward. I'd like to shift a little bit here and talk about something known as the halo effect. The halo effect is, again, is a cognitive trick our mind plays with us. And that is, we tend to think if somebody is good in one thing, it makes them good in other areas. So, and this translates in many different aspects. If somebody has a certain physical features, the way they appear, their height, the way they're built, whatever it is, we tend to think they have a certain skill set, halo effect. Or if they're very good at being a speaker, then we think, well, maybe they're good at managing money, which is not really the case. Or if we think if they're good at managing money, maybe they're really strong spiritually, which again is not necessarily the case. So the halo effect is this impact where if we see one positive thing in a person or a negative thing in a person, it works both ways, it translates to other areas. But there's a way that we can build on this in terms of our leadership. And that is when we become very good in a leadership area, one of those key components of leadership skill set that we've talked about, either the pillars, our character, or the different pillars of the tent that we discussed earlier, or motivating people. And if we become very good in one of those areas, it impacts how people perceive us in other areas. It impacts us positively as we become good at those things. So what I want to share here is something that maybe is awkward for us to think through, but each one of us in our leadership style has certain flaws in our leadership. And I want to encourage you to begin thinking about how can you fix your fatal flaws of leadership. And I'm defining a fatal flaw at a skill set that's at the 10th percentile or below. So, if people were to rate your leadership skill and through some kind of an assessment, and you are getting feedback by many different people, and that a particular skill that you have is at the 10th percentile or less, that would be a fatal flaw. And so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to share with you 10 fatal flaws, 10 areas that are issues where are concern for people. So let's walk through these. These are 10 fatal flaws. And Wayne, I had a couple of polls for these. I'm going to just skip those again for the purpose of time. So here are our first 5. A lack of energy, of enthusiasm. If we're marked, if people are looking at us and thinking through, well, how do I interact with people? Do I have inspiration? Am I enthusiastic? Do I have energy? If I don't, and I come down into the 10th percentile in that domain, that should be considered a fatal flaw. So think this through with me. Where are you in this realm? How do people perceive you? The next area here, a second point, is on accepting mediocre performance. This is a skill set of accountability. Do I hold people accountable or not? If I accept mediocre performance, if I do not hold people accountable, and holding people accountable is a whole nother conversation that we could have for leadership. But if I accept this mediocrity, that would be, if I'm at that 10% level, that would be a fatal flaw. And I really need to be thinking, how do I improve this? The next one here is, do I have a lack of vision, lack of direction? If people can see me as really being rudderless in the organization at that 10th percentile or below, something that I really need to focus on. Have I really lost people's trust? Have I ruined my relationship with people to the point where trust is so low that I'm at this 10th percentile or less? Or do people perceive me as not really being a team player, wanting to do my own thing as a leader? And you think that a leader would be focused on his team, his or her team all the time. Not necessarily the case. Oftentimes, leaders are more like lone mavericks, and they have a very difficult time working with their team. But if I'm part of any of these 5 flaws here, these are areas that I really should be thinking through. How can I get these fixed? Now I'm going to skip this poll and go to the next 5 of these fatal flaws. And these are also, again, are very important for us. Am I not a good role model? If people rate me as not being a good role model, not 10th percentile or less, that really should cause, particularly in the work that we're in, spiritual work, whether it's in the church or in supporting ministries, that should engender some very deep heart searching. Where am I? If I'm really not learning, people don't see me as wanting to develop and not grow in my skill set. That's another area of a fatal flaw. And I'm calling these fatal flaws, perhaps I should say this, if you have these and you're in this, you have 1 or 2 of these and these mark you, you're marked in this at this lower 10th percentile, this is really a warning sign. The red lights should be flashing, the siren should be going on, because this will be a negative part of that halo effect in terms of, a negative here at the 10th percentile or less is really going to have a strong impact on your leadership skill set as a whole. Lacking these interpersonal skills, resisting new ideas, and focusing on self. If I'm falling into the trap in these 10 areas, it's a real clear warning for us that we should be thinking through, what kind of a leader am I? What can I start doing in these areas to make changes and to correct them? Because if I can grow these, if I could get out of that 10th percentile and get into that 25th percentile or up into that 50th percentile or the 60th or 75th percentile, if I can keep moving up, it's going to have a tremendous impact in my leadership skill and my ability to bring about change in the organization. And really, that's what this is all about, is having our ministries, our organizations fulfill their mission. And the mission is all about communicating the gospel. Maybe it's a lifestyle center. How do we impact our lifestyle guests? Maybe it's a church or a union, a conference. How are we impacting people? A business. How are we impacting our customers for the gospel? Again, if our leadership is holding back the mission of the organization, as leaders in that organization, this should be a deep matter of prayer and concern for each one of us. So some observations about these flaws. So the 10 that I've just mentioned, again, all of these are fairly obvious. People will see them in you. The second aspect here is that these are really, let me call them sins of omission rather than sins of commission. And what do I mean by that is, you can have a lack of vision not by doing something, but simply by not thinking about vision. So it's a sin of omission. These are areas where we're simply not putting forth effort. That's why I'm calling them sins of omission here. These are areas that we're just overlooking. And it's not like we're doing something wrong, committing the sin. We may not be stealing from the organization, or we may not be, committing adultery or something egregious like that, but somehow we're just not moving forward in our leadership. The other key component here is that these flaws are largely interpersonal, not intellectual. Again, they're really relational. They're not dependent on our IQ, but much more on our emotional intelligence. How do we relate to people? How do we communicate with people? So these fatal flaws, again, they're fairly obvious. If you don't see them, I'm sure people in your team will if you're in that box. Again, they're sins of omission rather than commission. And again, they're much more interpersonal rather than intellectual. So how do we assess, how do we fix our fatal flaws? Well, one of the first things we need to do here are some thoughts. We need to assess our strengths and weaknesses. And let's move into this idea of developing a leadership or creating a leadership development plan. So assessing our strengths and weaknesses and finding out which one of our weaknesses this is the most significant. And then creating a plan to fix the weakness. And in order to do all of this, it's very important for us to get feedback. Warren Bennis has written this thought: the most dangerous leadership myth is that leaders are born. That's nonsense. In fact, the opposite is true. Leaders are made rather than born. So wherever you are in the skill set, there's room for you to grow. Kuz and Posner, who've done a lot of leadership studies, they've said that a good leader is one who has natural endowments, and then by practice, learning, and experience, develop these into a mature skill. Very close to echoing what Ellen White has said earlier as well. That God gives us the capabilities and the skill sets, and he wants us to grow and develop them. Again, education, page 266. The specific place appointed us in life is determined by our capabilities. Each should aim just as high as the union of human with divine power makes it possible for him or her to reach. So the specific place is appointed by our capabilities. We have a certain skill set, but we should aim as high as we can have with this union of humanity and divinity. Again, messages to young people: be faithful, put your heart into your work, imitate none who are slothful and who give divided service. That's a really important part, to surround yourself with people who will help you grow rather than pull you back. Actions often repeated form habits, habits form character. Actions often repeated form habits, habits form character. We are creating who will we become. You are creating the kind of leader you will be by the way you are acting today. So it's important for us to think through, to be intentional in what are the leadership strengths that I am encouraging and in growing. So how do I grow? How do I become a better leader, an extraordinary leader? First of all, make a decision that this is really important to you. And think through how your character needs to develop. What are those areas in your character that need to grow? Think through, what skill sets do I need to develop? Identify your strengths and work with those strengths. Let me focus here. I did mention fatal flaws earlier. I mentioned them as fatal flaws if you're at that bottom 10th percentile, and that's true. But as we think of developing as a leader, it's really important to identify your strengths and work on those. So fatal flaws need to be fixed. If you're at the 10th percentile or less, those need to be fixed because they all have this negative impact and poison everything. But once you're over that 10th percentile, if you have a skill set, it's the 20th percentile, and you have a strength that it's at the 70th percentile, identify your strengths and work on those strengths. So again, well, how do we do this? Really here, we need to get feedback. We can get this from role models. We can learn from our own mistakes, but we really need to seek out feedback. And this is very hard for us to do. We resist feedback. Now, I tell my church members or my family, I'm happy to hear your comments about my sermon, but not in the hall right after I've preached. Give me at least an hour to settle down, preferably a day or two. But then I really want feedback. So it's important for us to seek feedback in an appropriate venue. And a way to get feedback, here's a variety of suggestions for you. Do 360 feedback procedures, and OCI provides these. We work with our organizations around the world. We're happy to work with anybody providing 360 feedback procedures. Get performance discussions with going in your team. Coaching, again, as I mentioned earlier, I provide leadership coaching. OCI provides leadership coaching. Perhaps a leadership coach would help you in your development. There are personality profiles that exist. Again, OCI can help provide both these personality profiles and the team profiles for you as well. But whatever venue you're going to be seeking, get some kind of feedback from your team, 360 feedback from a coach, personality profile, whatever it is that suits your need the best. It's really important to get that feedback. A good leader is constantly seeking feedback because it just helps them improve. The book Counsels on Health, page 107, Ellen White says that our first duty toward God and our fellow beings is self-development. Really like this quotation. Our first duty toward God and our fellow beings is self-development. We need to learn to grow. How do we grow? Well, first of all, we need to become aware. And of course, isn't that one of our great problems as a church, as members of ASI, as ministry leaders, as business leaders, as church leaders? One of our great problems is we're Laodicean. And the problem with Laodicea is she is self-satisfied and self-deceived. She does not know her condition. It's hard for us to have an accurate view of ourselves. We need to get feedback from other people, a broad view of feedback so that we can grow. And this is our first duty toward God and our fellow beings is self-development, is growing. Every faculty should be cultivated to reach the highest degree of perfection, that we may be able to do the greatest amount of good of which we are capable. Again, just a caution, we're not moving into perfectionism, but we are saying that we need to cultivate, as Paul tells us, moving on to the high calling that God has given us in Christ Jesus. Everything should be cultivated to the highest degree of perfection, continually learning, continually growing, continually making mistakes because that's how we learn, continually expanding, moving toward this aim of becoming an extraordinary leader. So let me just end with this. And this is a creation of a leadership development plan. And this is a simple one. There are more ideas here. There are more ideas that exist in the world, rather. So on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see the objective and the rationale. So, what is it? Let's say that I have found out that I'm at the 10th percentile, 15th percentile of trust. People don't trust me. So my objective might be to write in there that I am going to develop trust. I'm going to improve my trust. I'm going to move my trust level, from a 15% to a 25%. That's what I'm going to do. That's my objective, and my rationale for that could be potentially, I've gotten this feedback and people don't trust me. Then I would outline a plan. So what is my plan that I'm going to do to create this trust? Maybe I'm going to realize I've been favoring people, or I'm not keeping my word. So I'm going to work on being more accountable for my commitments. And then my resources and support, what am I going to draw on to bring my plan into existence? Maybe I'm going to enlist a coach, or I'm going to find an accountability partner, or I'm going to talk to somebody in my organization. And then the next chart in the diagram is the timeline. What's it going to be? Where am I? How long am I going to give myself? Let's say I'm going to give myself 6 months, half a year to move myself from 15% to 25%. And then in the last column, what's the evaluation? How am I going to know that I've achieved this? Well, let's just say I had an assessment that pegged me at 15%. Let's say I redo that assessment, or a similar assessment at the end of 6 months, something to help me move this. And this is just a tool that you can use. If you're interested in getting it, you can email me. You can write to Stephen@outpostcenters.org. Be happy to send this on to you. But this is just a tool. There are many others that you could find as well. But develop some kind of leadership development plan. Create some kind of plan that works for yourself to move you from where you are to a step closer to being an extraordinary leader. Again, at OCI, we exist to try to help ministries and people around the world. And so if there's anything we could do for you in your leadership development, please let us know. But at this time, let's take some questions and answers. And perhaps, Wayne, if there are any questions or answers or anything I could help clarify.
So we had several comments, and if anybody wants to submit some questions, they can certainly do that. Doesn't look like we have questions at this point, but several very good comments, interactions of appreciating the presentation.
Okay, well, if we've got no questions, we could draw to a close. Does that work for you, Wayne?
Sure, no problem.
Okay, well, thank you each for participating, for being here. And again, hopefully this was helpful. Wayne, if you could put up my last slide, again, it's got my email address at the bottom. And if there's anything we could do to help you, any further communication along this line, please feel free to reach out. Let's pray together as we close. Father in heaven, thank you for our time together. We do pray for your Spirit to speak to our hearts, to move us forward in our own leadership growth, that we might more fully represent you. Lord, thank you for calling us. Lead us step by step. In Jesus' name, amen.